This is the IBJ podcast for the week of July 15th, 2024, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. As we've discussed, Indianapolis has been on an incredible tear, hosting multi-day events with national coverage and bringing tens of thousands of people downtown at a time. This weekend is no different, although between the NBA All-Star Game, the USA Olympic Swimming Trials, the debut of Caitlin Clark, Gen Con in August, and Taylor Swift's 3-show stint in November, this event has flown a little bit under the radar. More than 50,000 Catholics from across the United States are set to arrive in Indianapolis this week for the church's first national gathering in more than 80 years. This marks one of the most significant religious events the city has ever hosted. The National Eucharistic Congress, scheduled for Wednesday through Sunday at the Indiana Convention Center and Lucas Oil Stadium, will feature church services, speakers, presentations, religious sacraments, exhibitions, concerts, and live podcasts. As mainstream religions continue to lose followers, this event will be laser-focused on one of Christianity's foundational sacraments, the Eucharist, otherwise known as Holy Communion, or the Lord's Supper. It also will stage one of the most conspicuous outdoor public gatherings in Indianapolis's recent history outside of the Speedway, a mile-long procession through downtown that could be attended by as many as 50,000 people. Our guest this week is Ken Ogorek of the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, who discusses the revival and purpose of the Eucharistic Congress after an 83-year absence. We also hit on the ways the event is different from many of the religious conferences and annual meetings that Indianapolis traditionally hosts, and how local organizers are providing accommodations for participants with a variety of needs. And we delve into how church leaders will evaluate the impact of the Congress once the attendees are gone. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Ken Ogorek, Executive Director for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, Secretariat for Evangelizing Catechesis. I know you've been very busy preparing for the Congress, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
It's my pleasure, Mason.
Let's unpack that job title real quick. What is it that you do?
Simply put, I'm on Archbishop Thompson's leadership team. There are 7 of us who sit down with him once a week for an hour and a half or so and just kind of help him hash out all the decisions he has to make. Bishops have to make a lot of decisions, And then I help coordinate about a dozen ministries at the diocesan level. They all fall under the umbrella of evangelization and faith formation, basically religious education, or to be jargony, that word catechesis. So that's a simpler way. That's almost as long as my job title, but that kind of explains what I do.
Hey, I'll break down another word. And this is just sheer coincidence. Our pastor was talking about this just the other day during the sermon, Eucharist. And the base of that is Greek, is it charis, which means thanks.
Yes, that's exactly right. Eucharist literally means thanksgiving.
What then is the National Eucharistic Congress?
It's an enormous gathering of Catholics from all over the country and actually beyond the U.S., but this is the National Eucharistic Congress. And we haven't had one for over 80 years. So before World War II, I think there were 9 National Eucharistic Congresses, over the course of several decades, and they would occur in different cities around the U.S. Tens of thousands of Catholics would gather for various reasons, to hear talks, to worship together. Of course, the Eucharistic Congress is going to be focused on the sacrament of the Eucharist. But like a lot of things, World War II kind of interrupted some patterns. Even the Indianapolis Motor Speedway wasn't what it was for a year or two there. But for one reason or another, the pattern really didn't pick up again until a few years ago. Our American bishops, they're organized just for efficiency's sake and sharing of resources and so forth. It's called the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. They decided that it would be a good idea, first of all, to have a multi-year revival. So we're kind of in the middle of a multi-year Eucharistic revival. And I guess in some ways, a highlight of that revival is this national gathering of tens of thousands of Catholics right here in Indianapolis.
So I come from the Presbyterian Church, where we call the Eucharist, the sacrament, communion. I apologize in advance when I slip up and use the wrong terminology.
Hey, no words.
But it's,
no
you know,
worries.
it's known as the Last Supper. Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper,
Yes.
Mass,
Yeah.
Divine Liturgy. Is that?
Yeah, that's churches of the East, meaning sort of the eastern part of the world, not the eastern part of the U.S. Yeah, they often refer to their worship as divine liturgy. Yeah,
The focus, then I take it, really is on that sacrament
yeah.
of the church. And for folks who wouldn't be familiar with it, kind of explain that.
For Catholics, sacraments are just super important ways that we encounter Jesus, and we have 7 of them. Not that it's a contest. And some sacraments are really common to almost every Christian group, right? Like baptism, for example. And really, I would say the majority of Christian groups, they commemorate somehow the Last Supper, right? The Lord's Supper, when Jesus gave his apostles bread and wine and said, take this, all of you, and eat it. Take this, all of you, and drink from it. This is my body. This is my blood. So for Catholics, that sacrament of the Eucharist, and it goes by a lot of different names. We call it Holy Communion sometimes, or there's different things we can call it. But that sacrament is really it's almost like the sacrament of sacraments. It's sort of the high point in some ways. We sometimes call it the source and summit of our faith. So it's just a really important part of our faith. It's an important way that we encounter Jesus, given his gift of it to us. This is my body. This is my blood. This is me, basically. This is my way of being with you always until the end of the age.
But this is a 5-day event. This isn't just people getting up and getting the sacrament. It is all the things that could entail, all of those kinds of things that would contribute to the faith being discussed in depth or experienced in depth.
Actually, I might circle back to that thing about it taking 5 days or 5 days of people receiving communion, because as you might imagine, at very large gatherings, communion can take quite a while. It's an interesting thing to orchestrate, actually. But I was thinking the other day that the church is really into themes. Every few years, like maybe the Pope will say, hey, it's going to be the year of mercy, and we're going to focus on mercy, right? I'm not using that as an example. And it isn't that things other than mercy aren't important. They are, right? But every now and then we'll just identify, even throughout the church year, if you think about it, we have seasons like Lent and Advent and so forth. There are just times when we choose a specific theme or area of focus. And yeah, we get together literally and sometimes figuratively, really just to learn more, to try to understand more deeply, to try to sense better ways to apply these aspects of our faith to our everyday life. So it's kind of all the above. So yeah, there will be large group talks at Lucas Oil Stadium. Literally tens of thousands of people listening to some of the best Catholic speakers, and I would say some of the best speakers, period, in the country, if not the world. There's a service dimension to it. There's a huge service project. Actually, there's 2. One we've been doing up to this point. It's gathering hygiene items for folks who are unhomed. And then we're collaborating with an organization. I think we're going to try and pack like over 300,000 meals throughout the course of the Congress. So there's a service and charity dimension to it as well. Again, learning, praying, and the Mass that we have every day is going to be pretty amazing. There will be smaller Masses throughout the week spread throughout the downtown area, but Mass at Lucas Oil Stadium is going to be rocking.
Okay. Logistical question. How are you getting all of the elements for the Eucharist? Are you using wafers and wine, I assume?
Again, there's a fascinating logistical dimension to this whole thing, as you can imagine. So the container, if you will, that once the bread has been consecrated by the priest, again, and we believe it comes the body of Jesus himself, the form of bread, the container that it's distributed from, it's called a ciboria. We had to round up, I was just talking to our director of worship the other day, I think over 600 ciboria, especially for these large Masses at Lucas Oil Stadium. We've just had to round them up from a few different sources. National, there's some national organizations that do large conferences pretty regularly. So you just sort of start calling all your friends and saying, hey, can you spare a few dozen of those, It's a fascinating, just the Mass itself, because again, receiving communion, it's a part of every Mass, right? It's not optional. So if you're going to have Mass, whether it's in a small chapel or a football stadium, there's going to be a point at which people get up and come up and receive and have to get back to their seat. So it's amazing. But we've got great people. One of the reasons Indianapolis was chosen for this first National Eucharistic Congress in over 80 years is the track record we have of hosting national and in some cases rather large Catholic events. We've gotten to be pretty good at this sort of thing.
We, the city of Indianapolis.
City of Indianapolis, and also our local church leaders. You were mentioning Immaculate Heart of Mary Parish when we were kind of visiting a few minutes ago. And yeah, the current pastor of Immaculate Heart of Mary, Father Pat Beitelman, he was the director of worship for many years for the Archdiocese. And, every other year for, almost 15 or 16 years now, we've been hosting the National Catholic Youth Conference. So again, that's upwards of, in some years, it was upwards of 22,000 young people and chaperones. So Father Pat is the one who, again, you sort of get a schematic of the layout of Lucas Oil for that thing and say, how are we going to do this?
That was one of my questions. Yeah, because it would seem like since there hasn't been a Eucharistic Congress in 80 some years, like you'd be starting from ground zero. But there actually is kind of an infrastructure there of institutional knowledge and relationships with suppliers.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, even on an even larger scale, some of the enormous masses that have been held at St. Peter's Square in Rome, the World Youth Day masses, where it's not tens of thousands, it's hundreds of thousands of people celebrating Mass at the same time. So it's sort of, we use the experience we have from these sorts of events and then just kind of overlay it on whatever that specific event is.
Right. Yeah. There's a playbook, as it were.
Yeah, there is. There's kind of a playbook, yeah.
What is the main goal? When you get to the end of the 5 days, what do the organizers want to have happened? What do they want to come out of this?
We always want attention to be focused on Jesus, right? We want people to know him, to have a relationship with him. So this being a Eucharistic Congress, a big part of the goal is to help people discover or recapture the unique way that we encounter Jesus in that sacrament of the Eucharist. And then these acts of charity and so forth that I mentioned earlier, the grace of the Eucharist, it isn't something that we should take home and sit on the couch and say, gosh, I'm so proud of myself. I have the grace of the Eucharist. It's really meant to enliven our desire to serve our neighbor, to introduce others to Jesus, perhaps, who might not yet have a relationship with him. So I know that's a lot of words, but I would say the overarching goal of this Congress focuses on the person of Jesus himself with the angle, if you will, of the role that the Eucharist plays in the life of a disciple of Jesus.
Indianapolis hosts a lot of conventions and annual meetings. Sometimes these groups are talking about church policy, personnel, what have you. Yeah. Is this the kind of event where that would happen, or is this really mostly focused on, again, the Eucharist?
In some ways, Mason, it's kind of the antithesis of that. But we have all kinds of ways of discussing various issues and topics and debating and making decisions about things that fall in like to the area of discipline or practice or policy. That's all kind of happening all the time anyway. So this is really just an opportunity to not to set those things aside, but just to focus on the gift of the Eucharist. It's a joyful gathering. So it's really just an opportunity to not to ignore the importance of that aspect of church life, the decisions and the policies and all that sort of stuff, but really just to unite as disciples of Jesus and just celebrate in some ways, learn, celebrate, serve. So yeah, there isn't a big like hidden agenda or ulterior motive. And some of the church councils over history, 2,000 years, some of those gatherings got pretty rowdy. People are debating things. And yeah, there's an old joke about St. Nicholas being at the Council of Nicaea, and he shows up and he says, I've come here to bring presents and punch heretics, and I'm fresh out of presents. So this is not going to be one of those raucous, no one's going to be burned in effigy or anything like that. It's going to be, I don't mean to be disrespectful of the thought of the Congress. In a lot of ways, it's a party. It's a celebration.
Let's take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast and my conversation with Ken Ogorek about the National Eucharistic Congress. This is going to sound like a joke, but this is a question that has come up because I think rumors to this effect have been flying around. Is the Pope going to be in attendance?
So the simple answer is no. I think anytime you have an enormous gathering like this, you give that some thought. He's very aware of it, actually. A delegation from the U.S. visited him a few months ago, and they even took a thing called a monstrance when the Eucharist, or what we sometimes call the Blessed Sacrament, is going to be adored during a period of prayer. There's this thing, I'm trying to think of a good word for it, an implement, a liturgical implement called a monstrance, where the consecrated host sort of is lodged where people can view and adore while they pray. He blessed, our delegation took the monstrance that we're going to use to him, and he blessed it personally. He is sending a delegate, like an official delegate. So yeah, I think there are lots of things you'd like to have the Pope at, and I'm sure he'd like to go to more things than he's able to, but he won't be here physically. His delegate will be here. He's definitely aware and supportive, and it sounds like a cliche, but he'll be here in spirit.
There happens to be a presidential election coming up.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of political aspect to this event?
Again, the simple answer is no. It isn't that our faith doesn't have political implications at times. So certainly, I'm sure that will be a topic of conversation just among folks naturally attending. And you know how it is at some of these things, the talks and everything are great, but a lot of the enjoyment, a lot of the, I guess, additional enjoyment that people get out of them is just those conversations they have with, you're going to be meeting people from all 50 states. So I'm sure things like, money, sex, politics, religion, they all kind of gel together. And that's cool because they're all important things, but there's no direct connection of any sort toward our political life.
So you mentioned Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yeah.
How much more of the city and downtown specifically are you utilizing for the associated events?
So the convention center itself will be, I think we're using almost every square inch of the convention center itself because there are different tracks for the Congress. So there's like a family track, there's a Spanish language track. So for the breakout sessions, we need a lot of good space like that to use. We'll also be using several churches in the downtown area. We probably have at least a half a dozen really nice Catholic churches, probably within that, a certain radius of Monument Circle. In a special way, of course, St. John's, which is right across.
Literally across the street.
Yeah.
From the entrance to the convention center is St. John's, which has been there since 1860 something.
I think so. It was the
1871 maybe.
It was the original cathedral when the diocese first moved from Vincennes to Indianapolis. So St. John's is pretty much going to function as I don't know if it's 24/7, but if it's not, it's close. It's really going to be a Eucharistic adoration chapel. It's going to be a place where people can go really at any time throughout the Congress and just have that time of prayer in that beautiful setting.
Like 24/7.
I don't know. I should check on that.
Okay.
but it's for the vast majority of early morning until into the evening. I'm sure St. John's is going to be open. And there will be, every now and then, there will be a mass or something there, like a special event. But St. John's isn't the only church that's being used, though. It's just we're capitalizing on its nearness to the convention center.
What's this close? Holy Rosary?
Holy Rosary's pretty close down by Eli Lilly. You got St. Mary's over by
St. Mary's by Sears, which is an old Indianapolis joke. Yeah.
Yes, St. Mary's by Sears. That's right. And of course, our cathedral is at 14th and Meridian. So there will be several masses there for various groups. And on that note, it's interesting. There are groups who are capitalizing on the Congress to have sort of a pre-meeting or a post-meeting. We've got a huge group of Asian Pacific Catholics who are sort of having their, I don't know if it's an annual gathering or if they have a big meeting only every few years, but it's sort of logical. Hey, a lot of us are going to be at the Congress anyway. Let's have our meeting. Let's have our gathering. There's a meeting after the Congress of most states have a Catholic conference, which to your point earlier, it's a structured way for the church to interface with political leaders and community leaders. So we have an Indiana Catholic Conference, but most states have their own Catholic conference. So after the Congress, I know there's going to be a meeting of sort of all of the existing Catholic conferences, representatives of them, I should say, from throughout the United States. So there's a lot of going on sort of like before, during, and after the Congress as well. Lots of people come to Indianapolis.
They call it the crossroads of America.
Absolutely.
Did I hear that there's going to be a village set up in front of St. John's?
There will be a venue for prayer and musical performances. So yeah, there will definitely be, Georgia Street will be, at certain times, of course, I should say, there will definitely be some great music, some live music being played there.
How long has this event been in the planning stage?
I want to say about 5 years. That's probably not an exact time, but as I mentioned, we're in the middle of a multi-year experience that we're calling the National Eucharistic Revival. So the idea for the revival came up probably 4 or 5 years ago. And really, I think even though, there were some big decisions that had to be made, especially about having an actual Congress. But my sense is that there was a lot of positive momentum among the bishops of our country. Like, we love themes and we like to focus on certain aspects of the faith occasionally. So the idea of a Eucharistic revival, just an opportunity for Catholics and other folks actually throughout the country, just to kind of focus on that gift of the Eucharist and what it means for us. That picked up momentum pretty quickly and easily. So we're in the middle of a multi-year revival. There's actually the year that follows this Congress. That's kind of the year where Catholics are being challenged with the question, okay, so what now? So you've kind of rediscovered a love of encountering Jesus in the Eucharist, and maybe you had an opportunity to come to the Congress, and so you're fired up. So what do you do with this enthusiasm? How do you serve? How do you show your love not only for God, but for your neighbor?
What has your last year been like? What have your responsibilities been putting this together?
Even though there's a national team that is really doing a lot of the heavy lifting and planning, as you're pointing out, there's also sort of a boots on the ground dimension to it. So several of us who serve on Archbishop Thompson's staff, we've all kind of had our different roles to play. My main areas of activity have been helping to recruit volunteers. An event like this requires a lot of volunteers, especially volunteers who speak various languages and represent different cultures. So I've collaborated with some folks on the national team to really help try to recruit not just volunteers in general, but especially reaching out to, our Catholic community in the Archdiocese is very diverse ethnically, culturally, as far as languages go. It's getting more diverse every year, actually. So that, and also just encouraging attendance and participation in general, because even though, of course, there are folks coming from far away who need places to sleep, something like this, you also count on a decent percentage of the attendees essentially being commuters. So really, we've worked a lot on just promoting attendance and participation at the Congress. Those have been my two main areas.
How many volunteers do you expect to have?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. Yeah, I was just in a meeting this morning. So we're approaching the number 1,000. There's a smallish core of several dozen volunteers that have committed essentially to be a part of the Congress from the very beginning to the very end. So these are folks who are obviously, like myself, for example, because of my job and this being a part of my job, I can say, yeah, I'll be one of those staff volunteers, But then there are what we call shift volunteers. These are folks who are going to, just what it says, they're going to work a shift or two or more. So you add all that up and yeah, we're pushing 1,000. It's part of what makes something like this possible.
So my understanding is you're expecting 50,000-ish attendees.
Yeah, it's interesting. When the Congress was first being talked about, people were throwing out numbers like 80,000 because I think they were thinking, they just figured, well, Lucas Oil Stadium sits however many for a football game.
Yeah, about 60.
Yeah. And then you throw on, if people are on the field, well, they weren't really taking into account the staging that has to be set up for the Mass and the speakers. So when Lucas Oil is set up the way it's going to be set up for the Congress, I think you're looking at a seating capacity somewhere in the mid-40s. So probably a little less than 50. And they're selling, again, those tickets, if you will, those passes are pretty much claimed. So yeah, so you're looking at about 45,000 people at any given time in Lucas Oil Stadium. But as I mentioned earlier, there are additional folks who will be here for one reason or another.
So for capacity's sake, the passes that would get you into Lucas Oil, you need to hold that at about 45.
Yeah, basically,
There's a lot of other stuff happening around the city.
Absolutely.
But you do need to have a pass, as I understand.
Yeah. There's a process. You go online and it's pretty easy to find on your favorite search engine, National Eucharistic Congress, and you can get whatever passes might still be available. You can also sign up to volunteer pretty much till the very last minute.
My congratulations on the website. I found it very easy to navigate. It was very good. So do you have a sense of how many people are coming from outside of central Indiana? How many people are going to need accommodations?
I haven't heard that breakdown recently, so I don't want to be sort of cavalier about just tossing out numbers. I know that there was a hope that we would get at least 10 or 15,000 folks who would be commuters. And so I guess if you do the math, you're looking at probably at least 20, 25,000 people who need a place to sleep. Now, what's interesting is that not all of our visitors are going to stay in hotels. So some of our parishes, again, we're used to hosting like youth groups and things like that in less than luxurious settings, but safe settings. We've got all kinds of safe environment procedures in place, as you might imagine. So visitors have chosen a variety of accommodations, ranging from sleeping on a gym floor to some of our great hotels in downtown Indy, and of course in the peripheral areas.
Yeah, I didn't want to give like the impression that 35,000 hotel rooms will be occupied for 5 days. Yeah, people like you say who are sleeping in gyms, dorm room accommodations, either at University of Indianapolis, I believe.
Yeah, Marian University. Yeah, UIndy.
Sure, Marian. Yeah.
There was a lot of thought put into where will all these people sleep.
Is that number in the thousands?
So you're not wrong to say the total number of people. A lot of those will be hotel rooms, though. You know, I didn't really mean to downplay that so much, but just pointing out the variety. But yeah, a lot of these folks will be paying for hotel rooms.
I know that the Brickyard 400 is the same weekend. Did you guys run into any capacity problems with the Brickyard?
I'm not sure when that date was chosen. I wasn't a part of those conversations, but I think when it became clear that this was going to be on the same weekend, there might have been some initial, just natural sort of, questions about, is this going to have a negative effect? But I think the organizers of the Congress, they, as you might imagine, are working real closely with like Visit Indy and all of our good folks here. And whatever concerns there were have been worked out. I haven't heard lately that that accommodations are really an issue.
Now, there are 4 groups of pilgrims, as you would say, coming from the north, south, and the east and the west, speaking of the crossroads of America. Tell me about these folks that will be arriving on Tuesday.
As we're recording this, I think each of the 4 groups is officially in the state of Indiana right now.
Okay.
Because we're getting close. What a great idea, and what a great way for really thousands upon thousands of people to participate in this revival in Congress without those who can't come to Indianapolis. But yeah, so the actual people who are walking the whole way, that's a relatively small group from each of the 4 corners. And I think they probably had to pass some fitness test or something, I suppose. But and I should say, Mason, even those people aren't literally walking all the way, because like there are stretches of the desert, it's like, yeah, we're gonna drive this 100 miles,
No, it's like 125 in Death Valley right now.
Yes.
You don't want to go there.
But with those exceptions, there absolutely are 4 groups of young adults, I think mostly, who left from 4 different cities in the U.S. sometime in May. And it was all carefully planned out so that after the day's walk or at some point during the day, they would be at a place where people could line the streets because they're carrying Jesus in one of those things I mentioned earlier, the monstrance, So people could pray, they could worship, they could adore. I think towards the end of each of those days, there would be a prayer service or a mass or something, because the pilgrims have to eat and sleep and that sort of thing. So it's been really, I don't know if you've seen much of the media coverage, but there's just been great opportunities. I remember because one of the groups left from California, and it was maybe either the first or second day of that pilgrimage, walking over the Golden Gate Bridge. And it was an incredible visual.
And people could join them for certain legs of the trip.
That's exactly right.
People could kind of come and go, but there's still a core group that's making the whole trip on each route. And they literally will be walking into downtown Indianapolis.
Yeah. Now that mass, again, St. John's doesn't hold thousands and thousands of people. So some aspects of the Congress, like that mass, for example, isn't necessarily open to the general public. But it will be a pretty special sight, certainly, to see those 4 groups kind of arriving and then entering church for a welcome and a mass. I want to say Archbishop Thompson is going to be a busy guy. He's always a busy guy. He's a very energetic guy, but he was just talking about his schedule this morning at a meeting for the Congress, and he wants to soak it all in, and he wants to be that voice and face of welcome.
Now, on a smaller level, but no less significant level, there's going to be the highlight of the whole event, a processional. It's a 1.2 mile processional where you hope to get just about everybody involved.
Yeah.
Making their way through downtown Indianapolis, including hitting the circle and then coming around, I think ending up at the War Memorial.
I believe so, yeah.
How many people are you preparing for that one?
It's a little hard to come up with a real precise estimate, but you got to figure a lot of the folks who are there for the Congress itself are going to want to walk in that procession. And then there will be some other folks, I imagine, who might join. Or really, I think what you're going to see is a lot of people lining the route just to sort of watch the procession walk by. And again, a Eucharistic procession, we've got a consecrated host. We've got Jesus himself in that monstrance. They'll be worshiping, adoring, praying. They'll basically be paying homage, if you will, to our Lord in the Eucharist as he's walking past.
So if you start at oh my God, we have so many athletic facilities in this town. I forgot what it's called already. Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yeah.
They are going to have to line up. Let's say there are 40,000 people. That's got to take them to at least I-70. That's a ton.
Yeah.
And then they will get the call, and then they will move forward and then collect at the War Memorial. That's going to be an amazing sight.
It should be pretty awesome. I guess as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, well, of the 40,000 plus people who are here for the Congress, again, not everybody has the same degree of mobility, if you will. So not all of them will walk in the procession itself, but I bet a good percentage of them will. So the end point where there will be, we do this thing called benediction at the end of a Eucharistic procession or at the end of a formal time of adoration of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. There's a series of prayers and hymns that we often sing, and the people are essentially blessed with the Eucharist. So that'll be happening there at the very end of the procession. And then people will proceed then right to Lucas Oil for the evening session.
Oh, they go right back.
Yeah. Because the big evening session and keynote at Lucas Oil will kick off.
Yeah, it's like 3 to 5, I think, are the times.
And then the closing Mass on Sunday is going to be something I think really memorable for folks. The days are pretty long, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So that Mass is going to be, things will wrap up really early to mid-afternoon. So it won't be like the nights before where people are late nighting it. By the way, there's a pretty popular podcast that's going to be recording on Thursday night of the Congress, I want to say, from a watering hole near Lucas Oil Stadium. So even podcasts are part of this, as you might imagine.
Yeah, I it's not like I didn't mention them because I'm afraid of the competition. But yeah, that's right. I mean, there will multiple podcasts,
yes.
My understanding, that you would maybe see them recording like on Georgia Street, for example.
Yeah, Georgia Street. Or there is kind of an exhibit hall where there will be exhibitors and vendors and so forth. So I think that'll be a real center of activity for folks too, just stopping by to sort of see prayer and resources that different folks have to offer, different organizations to help with ministry and parishes.
So at the end of this, are there any metrics that you guys are going to follow up on to get a sense of the impact of the event? Anything you'd be able to, tell leadership a year from now, this was a success because?
It's challenging in some ways. I mean, metrics are great, but, there's a lot of unseen fruit that experiences like this bear. There was a survey done a few years ago about what Catholics say they believe about the Eucharist. And that specific survey, it gave the appearance that a decent percentage of Catholics was maybe a little unclear on really what the Eucharist is and why the Eucharist is so special and important in our life of faith. So my hunch is at some point, if not immediately after the Congress, then at some point towards the end of this multi-year Eucharistic revival period we're enjoying, we'll probably see some surveying along those lines. Has this had an impact on the understanding and appreciation that people have for the Eucharist itself? I know in my case, in 1995, Pope John Paul II was in Denver, Colorado for one of the World Youth Days, and his visit had a lasting impact on that community. There are several really active and successful Catholic organizations, if you will, that sort of sprung up in the Denver area in the aftermath, if you will, of his visit. So the moment I heard that Indianapolis had been chosen to host the Congress, I've been asking myself the question, what's the lasting impact going to be? What's lasting fruit is this gathering going to bear here in central Indiana? And that's kind of what it's exciting. Right now, we don't know. I'll be paying attention, let's put it that way, and so will a lot of other people.
I know you got places to be, so best of luck to you. This is going to be really something, and I'm sure folks are going to remember for a long time.
Thanks for the opportunity just to share a little bit about it. And if folks are able to participate somehow, great. Or even, again, a lot of what happens will be recorded and made available. So whether it's some of the great talks and so forth, there'll be ways for people to, I guess, enjoy the benefits of the Congress, even if they're not there in real time. So thank you, Mason.
My thanks again to Ken Ogorek. If you want to learn more about the Congress, you can read Mickey Shuey's story on the front page of the latest edition of IBJ. And before you get on with the rest of your week, there are a few other stories I want to bring to your attention. First up, it's been a long time coming, but Indianapolis city leaders hope to have a new animal shelter up and running by 2026. IBJ's Taylor Wooten explains the delays that occurred after Mayor Joe Hogsett announced the original plan 2 years ago. Also in this week's paper, Dave Lindquist details plans for a contemporary art museum in Garfield Park. And Daniel Bradley documents the population and development boom in McCordsville as its fledgling town center begins to take shape. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ, or, of course, online at ibj.com. I will say it's quite a bit easier to access all of the latest news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. Now, we're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months, just to get a sense of how valuable and original our content is. Just go to ibj.com and click on the subscriber button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back next week.